Welcome to your 10 at 10. Today is April 25th, 2023, and it's snowing outside. You gotta love that, right? If it was November, December, January, or February, but seeing as how it's April, that's not ideal. So anyways, today we're going to talk about possession after closing. Many real estate transactions the last several years, in fact, many years, right, have involved possession after closing. A lot of times I get the question, well, how long is possession after closing usually take? Well, typically it depends on local custom, right? And it always depends on the seller and the buyer and their situations and working that out, right? So when there is a situation when there's possession after closing, even if it's just one day, excuse me, what I would like you to do is use an addendum to the purchase agreement for temporary occupancy for the seller after closing. Okay. Yeah, it's a long one. And do you know why it's long? Because there's a ton of liability and responsibility and communicating that needs to take place when somebody is going to live in a house that they no longer own, right? Like, it seems like common sense. However, in the purchase agreement, like, we have a spot for your possession after closing. It's like 3 sentences long. Do you think that's a great communication tool? Probably not. So this addendum for temporary occupancy after closing kind of starts that conversation, lays out some ground rules and expectations. Okay. And they even call it a temporary occupancy period. So sometimes, and we think about, if you think about it this way, in some instances, and I've had this, right, where a seller has lived in the house almost their entire lives, like 30, 40, 50 years, and then they're selling, okay? We have a closing, and they're going to maintain possession after closing for 30 days, right? They've lived there their entire lives, and they're going to continue to treat the house as their own. But what happens when they don't own it anymore and they're making changes to the house when it's not theirs? And yeah, I've had that happen in the past. And not only it causes some interesting facial reactions when you start to have that conversation after somebody did something to a house that's no longer theirs. So anyways, like this addendum, like I say, for the most part, in the beginning, it talks about calling it a temporary occupancy period, and it defines that. It has a start date and an end date. The second paragraph is very similar. It starts out very similar to the actual purchase agreement, and it says the seller agrees to maintain all utilities in the seller's name and pay the bills for the utilities as they come due. It, however, spells out that the seller shall also be responsible for snow removal and lawn maintenance. So if you think about it, you sell your house, you're there for 30 or 45 days and you don't cut the lawn. Sometimes it's happened where, yeah, that seller doesn't cut the lawn over 30 or 45 days, saying it's not my house, it's not my responsibility. And then I know I've gone over and cut people's grass before they move in because somebody was negligent. And when I say negligent, I mean they didn't spell it out. They didn't explain it. They didn't have a plan for it or communicate with it. And I'm going to say that person that's negligent was the realtor. And in that case, it was me. And that's why I was cutting the grass, right? So it goes on to explain who should pay for the structure for misuse and who should just pay for regular maintenance of the structure. Kind of like what I was saying earlier, paragraph 3 is about making modifications to the property, right? Without the buyer's permission. That's a bad thing. Paragraph 4 is my favorite paragraph of them all because it says the seller and buyer expressly release the listing broker, the selling broker, and their affiliated licensees. So that's our get out of jail free card, right? Our job is to sell the house. Our job is to help a buyer buy a house. Once that happens, guess what? We're done, right? supposed to be done if we communicate that to our clients the right ways, right? Paragraph 5 explains what's going to happen if there's a fire or something like that. That's a big deal. Our purchase agreement doesn't explain that in that paragraph. And on top of that, one thing that I really love about this is it says the seller is supposed to maintain a renter's policy for their personal property, right? So if you think about it, possession after close, if there's a fire in those 30 days and the seller's possessions get wiped out, well, who's responsible for that? The buyer, their insurance policy that takes place on the day of closing doesn't cover somebody else's personal property, it covers theirs. The seller, probably canceled their policy, but even if they didn't cancel their homeowner's insurance, they don't own the house anymore. They don't have an insurable interest on that property. And that could be a very big deal when getting anything replaced. So it's good that it actually spells that out. And as an agent, I would make sure that we get evidence of their renter's policy, because it says they're required to have it. It's something they're agreeing to. And then paragraph 6 is similar to the purchase agreement in the respect that, hey, if you overstay your welcome, you're excuse me, you're a tenant at sufferance, and you're obligated to pay all of the legal fees to get you removed for the eviction, and on top of that, a daily rate. And you can have that whatever you want, whatever the buyer and seller agrees. But this is an addendum that Jamie's going to email you out today, and I would put it in your .loop templates, and I'd put it in there for a buyer or a seller, because if you're on either side of possession and occupancy, I would expect you to use this addendum. So if you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, do your best to make today awesome.